unless God has spoken in Revelation. And if he's spoken in the Old and New
Yeah,
Testament,
and I would say
then
this,
we have...
you know, there certainly are stories of interventions in the Bible. But we need to remember that a lot of the Bible is narrative. And God is presented as an actor in the narrative. And whenever you have God as an actor in a narrative, you're going to have the storyteller speaking of God doing this and God doing that and so forth. And I just don't believe that God did all those extraordinary things in the past and then stopped doing them.
Unless...
As if it were to kickstart the tradition. Now we got the tradition and now our job is to believe in it. But of course that stuff doesn't happen anymore.
Unless you find that God's interventions miraculously are limited to particular times of activity in, let's say, the history of the nation Israel.
Exactly.
A period of miracles at the time of the Exodus.
Right.
A concentration.
I mean, I'm not agreeing.
Miracles.
I'm saying that's
right.
what I'm talking about.
At the time of Jesus and the apostles. I mean, that's the traditional Christian answer. That revelation and miracles went together.
Yeah.
And the miracles, what would you say, are the swaddling clothes of Revelation.
And I would affirm myself, very short phrase, divine consistency, by which I mean simply, I'm convinced that however God acts in the present is how God acted in the past and vice versa. I don't believe there was a special time in history when God decided, I'm going to do all this spectacular stuff to show people some things and they'll remember the stories and then future generations will simply believe the stories.
Unless you say that there were special times in history where God acted to show his awesomeness, his mighty wonders, because he was taking the children of Israel out of Egypt, he was bringing the Messiah, he was founding the church, and then you would have.
Yeah. And that's what I find I cannot say.
And with that, why don't we move on to audience questions? We'd like to take as many questions as we can until about 5 till. So if you have a question you'd like to address to Dr. Borg or to Dr. Ferngren or to both speakers, please come forward. We have 2 microphones set up right here in the front of the aisles, and we will alternate back and forth, and you can come up and ask questions. Why don't we begin with the gentleman on the left?
I'd like to, first of all, thank you for an excellent discussion. I am not sure. I started to think about this question thinking that you would both identify yourself as Christians, and I'm really not sure that's absolutely correct right now. But if it is correct, you have each chosen to be Christian as opposed to any other belief system, whether it would be polytheistic or deistic or agnostic or atheistic. And in your process of choosing to be Christian, do you believe that Christianity is superior to all these other belief systems? And if so, is it because you believe that Jesus Christ was in fact God, or Jesus Christ was in fact the most perfect human being that we have history of that ever walked on the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, the obvious reason, of course, that we're talking about Christianity is because of the title of the evening. I have no interest in making a claim that Christianity is superior to all the other religions. I think it's better than some, but I would say the same thing about Buddhism, that Buddhism is better than some others because of the emphasis on compassion in both traditions, and I don't want to single out just those two. I'm just saying, I think the enduring religions of the world, the ones that have stood the test of time, are responses to the experience of God in the particular cultures in which each of those emerged. I think they are legitimate paths of transformation, and for me, transformation and salvation are virtually synonyms. So I'm not Christian because I think it's superior to all the other religions. I'm quite convinced that if I had been born Muslim, I would be a progressive Muslim. And if I had been born Buddhist, I would be an engaged Buddhist. The reason I'm Christian and not one of those others is partly an accident of history, but it's also because the tradition has been enormously life-giving for me. I'm at home in it. I love its stories. I love its music. And it's home for me in a way in which no other religious tradition could be. And I know that some people who have grown up in a Christian setting have been so abused by the Christianity they have experienced that it could never be home for them. But for me, it's home.
Like Marcus, I grew up in a Christian family and never seriously was exposed to a different belief system. But when I became a teenager, being somewhat intellectually curious, I wanted to make sure that the belief system was one that I could accept as an adult human being. So spent much of my time as a teenager reading books from the library on every conceivable point of view, Christianity and other religions. Over time, I sifted out those aspects of my faith growing up that seemed perhaps more speculative, less secure, less biblical. But the sieve through which I always passed my belief system was the Bible. And I have to say with you that many of the decisions, I think you said this, are ones we don't make ourselves. I believe very strongly in God's providence, having put me in a particular home, in a particular situation where I was exposed to ideas that I could accept. To me, Christianity has become increasingly a matter not of a series of dogmatic statements that reflect my mind's view, but the person of Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, my desire to conform my life to his teachings. And there I go straight to the Bible. And I would say that to a person who's wondering what Christians believe. The easiest way to do it is not to pick up a book about Christianity, but to go to the source. St. Mark's Gospel, the earliest of all of them, and read about Jesus and see if he seems to have a claim on what I believe he said to be.
Could you both please comment on this brief passage from a story by Mark Twain? Perhaps you're familiar with it. The deity pondered this matter during 4,000 years, unsuccessfully. But as soon as he came down on earth and became a Christian, his mind cleared and he knew what to do. He invented hell and proclaimed it. Now here is a curious thing. It is believed by everybody that while he was in heaven, he was stern, hard, resentful, jealous, and cruel, but that when he came down to earth and assumed the name Jesus Christ, he became the opposite of what he was before that. That he became sweet and gentle, merciful, forgiving, and all harshness disappeared from his nature, and a deep and yearning love for his poor human children took its place. Whereas it was as Jesus Christ that he devised hell and proclaimed it, which is to say that as the meek and gentle Savior, he was 1,000 billion times crueler than ever he was in the Old Testament. Incomparably more
Thank you, sir.
atrocious.
Could we maybe get them to...
I'm finished. Incomparably more atrocious than ever he was when he was at the very worst in those old days.
Well, I think that's a caricature, and I would expect it coming from Mark Twain and the views he held. If you go to the Gospels, you don't see an idealized plaster saint in Jesus. You see Jesus, who shows a variety of aspects of personality. He's fierce in his denunciation of the religious leaders who are hypocritical, taking advantage of others by laying burdens on them that they won't themselves accept. On the other hand, there's a tenderness and compassion in Jesus, and you see both. He can be denunciatory in attacking the sins around him. On the other hand, he can show great favor. So I think that's a caricature based on a lot of stereotypes.
2 comments. First one, the contrast that Twain describes there between the stern God of the Old Testament and the gentle, sweet Jesus of the New Testament. I think that is a very common and mistaken Christian stereotype. I have very often heard Christians say, well, of course, the God of the Old Testament is a lawgiver and judge and so forth, and the God of the New Testament is compassionate and loving. Absolutely incorrect. And I think Twain accurately expresses that common Christian stereotype, which verges on the edge of anti-Semitism, or at least supports it. Second comment, I think the threat of hell has been so abusively used in the history of Christianity that I would be inclined to agree with Twain's indictment. I don't think Jesus threatened people with hell. I don't think he was very much concerned with an afterlife at all. I think his passion was about what was happening in this life. But popular Christian preaching over the centuries has stressed the promise of heaven and the threat of hell as a primary motive for being Christian. And I think it's one of Christianity's 10 worst contributions to the history of religion. Anytime Christianity is presented as, it's about going to heaven and avoiding hell, it invariably turns the religion into a religion of requirements and rewards, no matter how much the language of grace and forgiveness might be used. If there is a blessed afterlife, it doesn't seem fair to most people that everybody gets one regardless. So there must be something that separates those who do get a blessed afterlife from those who don't. And then that becomes the requirement, whether it's believing in Jesus or whether it's earnestly repenting or whatever. And the fear that if you don't do that, you'll go to hell, leaves the attention of the person completely focused on their own well-being. And Christianity at its best, like Buddhism at its best, like Islam at its best, is about deliverance from that preoccupation with one's self, whether one's eternal self or one's this worldly self.
Can I add a postscript quickly? On the other side, as I'm fond of saying, in this world, justice is not always accomplished or achieved. And we can all name cases of people who were